All right. We've got two or three still to join us. So we should be halfway at this point. Be about halfway. We've covered a bunch of ground in the last 2 weeks. And today got security. It's security relative to the OS. We've always got to think about it, not just security relative to the OS, but also security of the system as a whole. So securing locations, securing network access to the system, and securing the operating system itself. So the questions before or issues that have come up before we kick into 16. Awesome. Okay, so we've got a number of different tools to help us when it comes to securing the OS itself. And by using the OS to help secure the system as a whole, the OS essentially has control of that doorway, if you will, to the network. And we'll deal with a bunch of different ways to go about securing the system. So we're going to look at different security measures, look at the different wireless security protocols. Now, when it comes to security over a wired network, the main tool that we deal with today is VPN. But when we're dealing with wireless, it's the different types of security, and we'll go through and compare them, the different ones that are available. And then we've also got to take into consideration, conceptually, security on a computer is like securing your home. And got a guy that comes by and cleans the pool. Got deliveries show up regular basis. So there's people here all the time, coming and going. May have friends over. And when we think about the computer and compare it to that, I don't want to let just anybody show up at my house and have free reign of everything. Certain people can come by, but I'm going to limit what resources they have access to. So conceptually, I got to look at it the same way. I may, let's say I had a get together, party, whatever, and people could bring other folks with them. And I would, I guess, trust their judgment on who they brought with them, and that they were using the best judgment. But I don't know these other people, and I don't know what their intentions are. And how do I protect myself and my resources when potentially somebody that I trust is bringing in somebody else to my home that I don't really trust? I shouldn't trust until I know them. So conceptually, that's a lot like malware on our computer, where something's been allowed to enter the system. And now that it's there, we don't actually know what it's doing. Let's see the commercials for, it's like a drug abuse or drug prevention commercials where they're talking about the kid goes into the neighbor's bathroom and runs right through their medicine cabinet. Conceptually, that's like malware. It was invited in, but once they were in, the intent for what they were doing became something far from what it should have been. So we've got tools that we can apply to the computer to help us there. And they've got some scenarios that we can deal with towards the end of the chapter. So I've got to look at physical security and access controls to the system as a whole. Now, there's a Google server farm out west. I can't remember what state it's in. I think it's out in New Mexico or somewhere. And there's videos online of their security. And their security is such that there's physical gates around the premises. And you've got to have badging and credentials and everything just to get on the property. And then there's multiple layers once you get on the property. There's security that are patrolling the grounds. And even if you're an employee and a high-level employee, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have access to the most sensitive areas within the compound, or a lot of times they'll call them campuses. So we've got to have physical security to prevent access to the system. And it could be locked doors, security guards, a number of things to prevent physical access to the system itself. We use biometrics to get into the buildings, and all these things add up to deter. It's the best word for it. It's deterring the people from trying to get in. But a lot of people look at it, oh, that's a challenge. I can get in there. So let's say they got in. Somehow they got in the building. Now, not only are we having to secure the systems, and it could be a server room, the client machines, it could be any kind of network asset. We've got to physically tether them, or I hate to use the word chain them. At college, we use cable locks that connect the systems to the desk. And the cable locks also lock the cases from being able to be opened. So unless you've got the key to the lock, you can't even open the computers themselves in many instances at our campus. So the systems are locked down to where people cannot remove them from the premises. There's a variety of different types of locks, and here's an example of what we've got at school. This one just locks it from being able to be opened. It doesn't keep somebody from walking away with it. There are what are called port locks, where we can literally put locks in the USB ports that would prevent somebody from taking data with them from the system on a portable USB drive, thumb drive. And this is that step beyond saying, don't do it. Don't bring your thumb drive to work. Don't take anything with you. This is, we told you not to, and we're going to make sure you don't. So even though we want to trust the employees and whoever we've given access to, we still have to lock these things down any way that we can. Now, these USB locks, they are preventing access. Now, that access could be to take something from the system, or it could be to introduce something into the system. Either way, damage can result. So we've got theft prevention. We've got reduction of the likelihood of somebody stealing some data from us. We don't want them stealing the unit itself, and we don't want them introducing anything into the system. I remember going on MacDill Air Force Base over in Tampa years ago, and before I could ever walk in the room, every screen that was in that room had to be turned off because I didn't have the permissions to be able to have eyes on any of those displays or anything that those screens could potentially display. So I had to literally walk through the room. None of the screens were on. Everybody had to stop what they were doing as I passed through the room. Now, that's one level of security. And there's a bunch of them. Now, we try to track the devices to know where are they, where they're being stored. We do inventories at least once a year at the college to track every asset, every resource. So if somebody's issued a computer, an employee literally has to put eyes and hands on that computer at least once a year and make sure that it still exists and hasn't been stolen, hasn't been destroyed, whatever it may be. We can do this with RFID chips, where a sensor would notify administration if something was had passed by a sensor or had gone beyond the range of a sensor. So there's a variety of different ways that we can keep things from leaving and keep track of the resources. Now, you've all got to deal with the same thing I got to deal with, which is multi-factor authentication, or we use two-factor authentication, meaning there's two ways to authenticate who you are. It's not good enough to just have it be a password anymore. And there's days that I go to log in and I have to do two-factor authentication 4 or 5 times just to get the resources up and running that I need to teach class. And it's just because of the variety of different platforms that the resources I'm using exist on. So they look at it as the AAA in security. They want to authenticate who it is, authorize them to only the resources that they're authorized to have access to. And then we've also got accounting, which is keeping track of all access. So we've got different ways to manage access. So if you wanted to use your two-factor, it could be you got your password, then you got the secondary, which could be Microsoft's app. At FAU, they use an app called Duo. Could be your phone. There's a variety of different secondary authentication measures. If you don't have your phone, it can be kind of difficult to have a second way to authenticate. So in this respect, we're trying to limit access to the people that we don't want in the system. And at the same time, we're in many ways limiting access to the people that do need access to the system. So we've got biometrics, we mentioned that before. There's digital certificates that it's almost like a passcode for you to access the resource. A lot of times it's third-party systems that manage those certificates to confirm who you are and your access. Here are the authenticator apps that we were just talking about. And others we don't use as much. Now, I was in a conference one time, and the guy that wrote one of the most popular cybersecurity books that's used in teaching first and second year college security courses. He did a demo, and in his demo, he had everybody go pick a password. And he said, all right, you give me the password, I'll enter it in this system, and then I'll use my other system and see how long it takes me to find the hash for that password. Now, we traditionally just think about our password as that's the key. That's what's being used to secure whatever it is I'm doing. But it's not the password itself. The password itself is converted into what we call a hash. And then that hash is what's being passed to the system. Now, the hash gets more complex primarily based on the length of the password. So if you've got a really, really long password, that hash becomes very complex. But the traditional passwords that we're being told to use, 8, 9, 10, 12 characters long, mix it up, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, throw in a special character. The short ones can take a matter of seconds to hack the hash, to have software find out what the hash is. I don't need to find your password. I need to find your hash. It's that code that's created by your password. And it can take a matter of seconds for short passwords. And it could be a variety of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters. It doesn't matter as much. Length of the password is the big deal. So we want to have secure passwords, which ultimately equates to long passwords. The longer the password, the more inconvenient it's perceived to be. And the more inconvenient something's perceived to be, the less people are going to want to do it. So if you were told, we're implementing a new procedure and you have to have a password that's 30 characters long, and you've got to have at least 5 numbers in it, and some uppercase as well as lowercase. At some point, you start writing it down because it becomes so difficult to remember it. They don't want you using the same password on every system. So you could potentially have a very large number of passwords that you've got to remember, and they're all different, and they're all very, very long. There's software that's available to manage passwords, and there's risk associated with those. There's third-party applications that keep track of all our passwords. As long as you've got access to that third-party system, everything else is safe. But how safe is that third-party system? We assume that our banks are safe, but they get hacked. We assume the cities that we live in, that their systems are safe. They get hacked all the time. So the safest place for your passwords to be is, I want to say in your mind, but when you're talking about a bunch of very long passwords, and that's the only place they exist, it doesn't get too difficult to lose them or forget them. So it's quite often people will write them down and have them on a sheet of paper in their desk or taped to the bottom of their keyboard, which ends up being a huge issue. So when I was in MacDill, I was telling you about before, where you walk in the room and you hear the word eyes, and all the monitors are already off, and if they're not off at that point, they are going off immediately. I literally had to walk through every door on my own. I was given temporary access card that identified me, and they could track me. And as they tracked me, I had to swipe my temporary card to go through every door. It's the same thing when I was out at Microsoft campus, that was last year. Every room, every building that I went into, I had to swipe. And I had to make sure the door closed behind me as soon as I got in there. You didn't walk into a room in groups. Everybody goes in individually. They call it tailgating when somebody slips in on your pass. It's almost like going to the subway or going to the metro and somebody trying to squish through as you're going through the system, going through the turnstile. So we got to make sure that does not happen. And that's just the protocols that we have to implement to make sure we're tracking who goes where, who has access to specific places. And that's what we're talking about at this point, is the physical location, who can get where. Now, it's not just being able to get to places, but also somebody could tailgate on your connection on a client machine. So it's almost conceptually the same as somebody slipping in as you just walked in the door and you don't notice them walking in behind you. Well, you log into the computer and you get up to go to the bathroom or get a cup of coffee or take a memo over to somebody across the room. While you walked away from that system, you left that door open. And that door was open for somebody to potentially get onto that computer and essentially be presenting themselves as you, because they now possess all your currently open access. And they're not going to be able to open anything else, but whatever you left open, that can be very high risk. One of the ways we can get around that is to set a screensaver lock to where if the system's idle for a certain period of time, it locks, and then you've got to use a password to get back in. Now, that can be a pain. If you set it too short, you're locking yourself out all the time. You set it too long, then it's not as effective as it really needs to be. So they've got a pathway to go in and set that on the screensaver lock. Just watched something today that we see a lot of fishing. I love to go fishing, like on my boat, go fishing, but this is not fishing with an F, it's fishing with a PH. And I literally have to take training. Every employee at the college has to go through training every year about spearfishing, because they target you presenting themselves as being somebody else from the college or somebody that I'm familiar with. Could be somebody in administration, somebody above me that they're presenting themselves as being, and asking me to do something. They could send me a document that says something as simple as, hey, what do you think about this? And if I open that document, I've then infected the system that I'm on. And if I'm on my college computer, that's an issue. So lately, people have been doing the same thing, but via the phone system, using AI to generate voice of somebody that you know, to present themselves as somebody you know, could be your boss, could be whoever, and asking you to do something over the phone. And whatever it is they're asking you to do, it falls along the same lines as the phishing or the spoofing, acting like somebody else. So there's so many ways that they're trying to get to us to present themselves as somebody they're not. Probably get at least one a week. That I got one 2 weeks ago that was from FAU, that everything about it said it was legitimate. I mean, it just came across so legitimate about financial aid, scholarship, this. It came from an FAU account. It had everything was there saying FAU. And it was so phishing. And you've just got to, I don't want to say not trust anybody or anything, but just have the understanding that there's going to be a lot of things that we don't know who it is, and I don't want to assume it's somebody that they say it is, unless I'm 100% sure. So they talk about malware, and the malware, it stands for malicious. So it's software that has some kind of malicious intent. Intent is what they want it to do. And there's a variety of different things that it could do. And how it ends up getting on your system. How about this? So, we're talking about those USB locks. Never put a USB drive or a thumb drive in your computer that is not yours or not from a trusted source. Because those drives can have an executable on them that as soon as you put them in, the system reads the drive and can potentially, depending on the settings of the device, can execute that software that's on there and automatically install stuff on your machine. Or copy stuff off your machine to that thumb drive, and you wouldn't even know it. So how it gets into the system is a variety of ways. They can get in there through the email scams, the phishing, the spoofing, those kind of things. You could inadvertently carry it in and put it in on a thumb drive. You could access a website and download something from a website that was not what you thought it was going to be. And if that's the case, we've got to put some protocols in place to prevent the success of that. So now it goes back to we've got to kind of put security on the doors, if you will. It was comparing the computer to my house. If I want to make sure everybody that's in my house is supposed to be in there, and if anybody else that's brought in, how do I control who's coming and going? Could be like a bar where there's a bouncer at the door and check everybody's ID to see who's who. That's one way. We can do that with software. So we do that. Now, how do we deal with the downloading software? Well, we set policies in place that put steps along the way to check so that software is not installed with just a single click. It could take multiple clicks, or it could take multiple clicks and administrative rights to be able to do something like that. So the more we lock these things down, the less likely bad things are going to be able to happen. But it's like I was saying before, the more we lock these things down, the more difficult and cumbersome we're making day-to-day tasks, the longer it's taking to do things. So what kinds of things are we having to deal with? So there's a virus, and that's a program that essentially replicates itself by attaching to other programs. So let's say you got some software, you installed it on your machine, you bought it from somebody or downloaded it. That software can have other software piggybacking off of it. And when you go to install the thing that you want, not only are you installing that, but you're also installing something else you don't know. So that's like that one where you invited people and then somebody brought somebody else and you didn't realize they brought somebody else with them. Spyware, this is the creepy one. This is like somebody looking in your windows. So they can install a keylogger. That's software that just sits in the background. You don't see it unless you go look for it. And then you may not even know what to look for because of what they've named it. If you go in and look at Task Manager, look at the processes that are running, they're real good about how they name these things. So essentially, this thing sits there and runs and watches what you do. It could keep track of every key stroke that you hit on your keyboard. So if you typed in bankofamerica.com, or you typed in your username and then you typed in your password, it's keeping track of it. And it then sends that data out over the network, and you don't even see it happening. It sends it out to a server. And then on that server, they'll have software that will scan it and try to identify usernames and passwords. So we've also got worms that essentially, they just clone themselves over and over again. And it eats up resources that you've got and slows things down. And it gets to where there's so much going on that it beats up a system. Now, this is different from like a denial of service attack, where there's so many clients that are attacking a server. This is different than that. It overloads the network. But it's not like a bot. It's a little different from a bot. And then we've got Trojans that they don't have to piggyback in off of something. They come in and they appear to be legitimate. Something that, oh, yep, I got that software. That's not that software. That's something else. So we'll have software that will prevent these things from being installed, prevent them from happening. They've got an example here of you opening up a system or opening up an email, and it lets a Trojan in, and then you get hit with a rootkit, And essentially, what can happen is, remember we were talking about the BIOS. Now, last week we talked about the BIOS and UEFI. The week before we talked about it as well. Now, what would happen if information that was supposed to be on the BIOS was not there? Or information that was supposed to be in those boot files that we talked about last week, the master boot record, or there's a file boot.ini that's the initializer that gets your operating system up and running. So if somebody installed this software, this Trojan on your machine, and it went in and attacked your root, it attacked the boot itself, your ability to start this machine up. And when you went to go start up, instead of it going through the normal process to start up, you've got this screen that pops up that says, actually, your OS has been hijacked. And if you want access to your computer again, you need to call this number or email these people and send them money. And it's hard to get around that unless you really know what you're doing. So they go through the different ways of what's taking place, how to go about attacking. So if they wanted to, they could get in and do the damage. And if they do it, and that screen pops up, call it ransomware, it's holding your computer hostage. The best way around this is what we were talking about last week. You can have restore points, but if you had an image, if you had a recent image, it could be a day or it could be a weekly image that you capture, and this happened, that you get ransomware and they've got you locked out, all you lost is maybe 5 days of work, 5 days of data. So there's workarounds, and that kind of goes back to the things we were talking about before, the ways to have redundancy should the system fail. Well, this is a system failing. It's just failing because somebody attacked it. Oh, Moses, you're saying, how would you get around that? You're talking about get around the ransomware? Because the way what I was just describing with that image is how we would get around it. We would have an image of our hard drive. We could take that hard drive and then lay that image back down on the hard drive. And the hard drive, we could just pull the hard drive out of the box itself, do it on another box, put it back in, and we're good to go. There's ways to get around it. They're not easy ways. And that's how, some of these cities, they get hit with ransomware. The question is, what if they lock you out of your computer? What are we saying? Yep. So this question is, if you guys can see it in the chat. What if you can't get in software-wise? And that's what they do. They throw a screen up, and every time you try to get into the system, you get hit with this wall if you will, that is the extortion screen or holding your system hostage. The way around that is to have an image of your OS, capture these images on a regular basis, and we can then take that hard drive and access it from another machine. I mean, you got to think about what's taking place on this drive. This drive got hit with a Trojan. It got hit with an attack that went in and it put a wall between you booting up, when you're turning the computer on and actually having a successful boot sequence. If I connect that hard drive to another box that's up and running, I can then take that image that I have created as my backup and lay it down on that hard drive, and it undid whatever they did. But I did it outside of the box. I had to go around the boot sequence. I didn't actually boot up the box. I went in and I could have essentially just taken another hard drive, formatted that hard drive, or taken another hard drive and imaged it to be what the system used to be. All these things involve a lot of time, a lot of work. But it's insurance. Think about how much we spend on car insurance, how much we spend on business insurance, homeowners insurance. All the money that we spend on insurance is to protect us when the bad things happen, help us recover when bad things happen. Well, that's what creating an image of the hard drive does. That's what the restore points do. They allow us to recover from these bad things. And it depends on how they go about it, what kind of method that they attack us. There's different kinds of attacks. They've got, it's like the evil twin. If you go into an airport, I don't connect to Wi-Fi at an airport very often, unless it is for sure something I know what it is. Because it's easy for somebody to go create their own access point, call it PBIA Wi-Fi. Oh, look, they got free Wi-Fi at the airport. No, they don't. No, they don't. But people will assume, they'll be gullible and they'll fall for it. And by accessing that, now they start going back and forth, and whatever goes across that access point, they have access to. There were 0-day attacks where there were known holes in software, holes in the OS that they could get in. And then it's on Windows or on Microsoft or on Apple we've got to go fix this and shut it down. There's also a denial of service attack where I compare it to, you walk into fast food places, Arby's, Wendy's, Burger King, could be any of them. And there's only one person working at the counter, one person working at the register. And we'll assume, for the sake of this example, that there are no kiosks where you go do it yourself. So a denial of service attack is when so many people come up to that counter that one person says, I'm out. I'm not doing this. Not doing it. And they can make a server do that exact same thing by having so many requests hit a server at any given period of time that it overworks it. And there are security measures on the servers that if they're perceived to be under attack, shut down. Safer to shut down than to be attacked and they get in. So that's the intent, is to deny service to other people, to take you offline. They show, here's how it works. You've got the attacker. They've got a computer controlling the client devices. They're bots or zombies that have software on them that all attack a victim about the same time. The controller reaches out to them, sends the message of where to attack, when to attack, and then they do it. And the more zombies or bots that they have, the more likely they are to succeed in taking down that system. It could be a controller and it's sending so many individual hits off of one machine. This is distributed. So it's, instead of having one machine beating the heck out of the victim, this is having a number of machines all beating the victim up. So they've got what they call a dictionary attack. A dictionary attack essentially is that there, hang on. I love a good comment in the chat. Dictionary attack is essentially, there's a list of common passwords, and those common passwords, people use them. A lot of people use them, the same password. Password 1, or what's the Wi-Fi password? Wi-Fi password. And it's amazing how many people that, to be able to remember something, they use something that's so simple that it's so frequently used that it's ended up on dictionaries somewhere. Now, another way that they'll go about it is they'll do some social media analysis and try to guess it based on things that you've said online, birthdays, pets' names, variety of things there. There's a phrase that they use here called brute force. And in IT, what brute force means is, there's a good analogy to it. So, how many combinations are there of numbers on a lottery ticket? There's a mathematical calculation. So when you see on the back of the ticket, it says there are 1 in however many million is your odds of winning it. because there's one combination out of that many million possible combinations. So what if I went and bought one ticket for every combination? I'm going to win. And if the value of that prize exceeds how much it cost me to buy every ticket possible, win. Now, covering every possible combination, that's what we call brute force. I'm going to go try every one. If it was a combination lock and it had 4 little number things, and each one had 10 options, that's 10 to the 4th power. That's how many combinations that it could be. And if somebody sat there and tried every one of those 10 to the 4th power combinations, that's brute force. So they can use what's called a brute force password cracker. It just starts trying everything. And depending on the CPU, the processor of the device that they're using, how fast they can interact with that system, that's going to dictate how successful they are. So as the capacity of computing has increased, the level of security's had to increase. All right. So if we look at what we were just dealing with, the different concepts that we just talked about, they've got what they call reasons that we would be considered or deemed vulnerable to attacks. How do we end up vulnerable? Number one way is that we don't have sufficient policies in place or enforcement of the policies. The other is we've got policies in place, but we don't have our systems updated to protect themselves. So most of the updates, when we have to update our OS, most of the updates that we have to install are security updates. It's not making our machine run any better. It's not changing our experience any. It's just making sure the thing's safe and protecting it from threats. So at a certain point, Microsoft says, you know what, we're not supporting that operating system because they're not going to keep spending money creating updates and patches for it. At some point, it's like, look, that OS, Windows 95, it's too old for you to be running as it stands, and you need to get a new computer or you need to have a new operating system. You shouldn't be running that, and we're not going to support it. We're not going to protect it. So if they stop writing the patches or the updates, that's like front door on your house, the door lock got broken, and there's nobody to fix it because the lock's so old, nobody's got the tools to fix it anymore. So we've got to take that into consideration. There's a lifespan, a usable lifespan for these computers. And I always say it's 3 to 5 years. If we get beyond that, then the manufacturer, Microsoft, Apple, whoever it is going to tell us, look, that thing's so old, we're not supporting it anymore. There's another way that we become vulnerable. Has to do with this on the programming side, and it's SQL. That's how we pronounce the SQL. It's SQL, structured query language. It's a language, programming language, to interact with databases, and they can use that language to get into our system or hack our system. And it's used so much that it's hard to protect yourself from that because it's so widely adopted. So we've got cross-site scripting. And essentially what that is we're dealing with websites, and the websites end up either infected or unknowingly passing a script that when that script hits your system, and we got to think about how the internet and how browsers work. For you to open up a web browser and look at a file, and that's all it is. When you get a web page, it's just a file. And you're using the browser, which is an interpreter, to display the file that's being presented to you from that web server. Now, if a component in that file is infected, has a script on it that you're not aware of, your browser then goes to display that screen, and it's running all the little scripts that are on there to put marketing ads on the side of your window and do everything that you got to do to display this website. All it takes is one malicious script running in the background, and bad things happen. So that's the cross-site scripting that they're talking about. So I could have a threat from disgruntled employee. It could be somebody that thinks they're not being treated right, they're not making enough money. It could be a variety of things. And whatever the reason may be, they want to access things that otherwise they shouldn't have access to, or they want to damage something out of some form of retaliation for some injustice that they've suffered. Or it could be they're taking our intellectual property and selling it to somebody else to make money, whatever it may be. It's a threat from the inside. It's one of our own employees. Could be intentional, it could be unknowingly, you just don't know. The fact that I've got to do training every year addresses this one note where they've got lack of user education. So if every year we make every employee go through this updated education, it's not the same every year, go through this updated education explaining the whole process, why things are locked down, why we have to do things a certain way, how to recognize bad things happening, then our users are being informed. So we've got to have plans in place of how to protect these. So we've got antivirus, anti-malware. We've got software in place. We've got security settings for user groups and permissions, and you only have access to certain things. The way these viruses and malwares are detected, if we don't know what it is, we won't notice it until bad things start happening. But the viruses and the malware, what we call a signature, some way for us to recognize, I know what it is. And that signature is in a database or a data set that is constantly being updated in the antivirus, in the anti-malware. So we've got to keep that up to date and protect the system from those things. Pop-ups is one of the things we try to keep pop-ups blocked. But the bad part is, like for you to run MindTap on Cengage, you have to allow pop-ups. Now you can allow just pop-ups from that server. So there's settings you can go through and say, all right, I want to allow pop-ups, but only from this server, only from this domain, not any others. All right, so the protocols I was talking about before, where we put steps in place to make sure before something gets installed, we make sure that we know what it is. Now, software traditionally has what's called certificates, where Microsoft kind of gives, I'm going to say, gives it its blessing and says, yeah, we've okayed that. That's legit software. And by them saying that's legit software, they issued it a certificate number so that we can look to see, does that software have that certificate number? Is it legit? Is it on the list? And we then put a record of it in our system as being trusted, and we can run that software. Without it, our system won't let it run. So Microsoft provides us with that. That's part of the Microsoft Management Console, that it keeps track of all of the certified or legit software. That's huge. It is huge. So without that, we're just hoping bad things don't happen, because this is rogue or unknown software if it doesn't have that certificate. Now, if a system is infected, first thing to do is get it off the network, isolate it, see if you can get into it in safe mode or some kind of mode. And if you can't, then use a specific other computer that's not on the network, that's isolated, that has the right software to be able to isolate that drive and access it safely, to be able to take care of whatever we've got to take care of on it to fix the things that have happened. So first step's just, or step two is to quarantine it. we've got a variety of things that we've got to go check to see running. I want to be able to run the antivirus, but the thing is, if it realizes there's malware on your machine or there's a virus on your machine, how do you fix that? Well, the same way we fixed things last week, where we had a restore point or we had an image. If today there's a virus on my computer, I want things to be the way they were before I didn't have a virus on my computer. So it'll recognize it and say, all right, we're going to go back to a point in time before we had this. And that's how we'll go about repairing what took place. Traditionally in safe mode, and then run the software, and the software will take care of it, depending on the software that we've got. Microsoft Defender's part of Win 10 and Win 11. And we can use, there's a variety of different anti-malware softwares that we can use. They could be built into the antivirus in some cases. And so if I've got antivirus, anti-malware, one package, it's constantly running, watching everything that's going on. And that's like having a bouncer at the door, patrolling security all around the house, making sure bad things are not happening. It uses resources, and sometimes it uses a lot of resources. So there's a cost associated with that defense. Even Microsoft's Defender, it beats you up on resources. Others far worse than Defender, but having those and paying that price by giving up some of that processing capacity to run those applications, it keeps us safe. So we talked about this last week. What do you do if infected system won't boot? Well, let's go into that recovery environment, pull up the installation disk or recovery disk, and see what we can do to get through things there. So we've got that. And if we can get up there, repair things that we can, we're going to go through and run these scans all over again to make sure that we're good. And we got to make sure that every time we run those scans, checking for viruses, checking for malware, that their software is updated with the latest files that have all the signatures on them. We'll go through it time and time again. So this isn't just, oh, I scanned it and it removed it and we're all good. No, we've got to go through and make sure everything's cleaned out. Make sure nothing's been left behind. So we can do it in a command line. We can do it with the software. We want to make sure that we get rid of anything that could have been added in that we didn't recognize. If there's something we're not using, we don't need it, we'll get rid of it. Just using up resources. So, just like I said before, we want to set those restore points that when we go through and do restarts, got to have a restart happen ever so often. Mine's set to go off at night while I'm sleeping, which is a good thing. But when I get up and I've got to go to work in the morning and start the computer up, on some days when it has done that, yeah, it's created that restore point for me. But with everything that I've got loaded on the system, sometimes it takes a very long time to get up and running. And if it did updates before it shut down, then those updates get deployed when you restart. So that's a time factor. So schedule the updates so that the antivirus and the malware signatures are updated. Create restore points, create disk images on a regular basis so that you have something to recover to if you get totally taken down. Try to always use some form of firewall, software firewall that everything has to go through so that somebody just doesn't come in over the network and wander around in your computer. Windows Defender's got it built into it. By default, it's on. So it's kind of like having a bouncer at your network door when it comes to the computer. So we've got our updates, software, both of those are done on a regular basis. You've got a firewall to keep anybody from getting in that way. Make sure that we've got a restore point, and not just a restore point, but system image as well. And make sure that the people that interact with our system, they say the end user. No, it's not just the end user. Anybody that interacts with the system on any level is fully aware of the security protocols that play in their roles, that everything that they've got to do relative to their roles. Now, in a way, it's like saying, hey, here's what we're doing to secure this, and here's what you need to do to make sure it stays secure. Part of that is almost like saying, here's the things that we're doing to prevent you from getting in, and in a way, here's how you get around them. Or here's how they can be circumvented. So we've got to have policies in place. It's got to be documented. It has to be maintained over time. And we have to enforce the application of these policies. We got to make sure that all our licensing, software licensing, it's all updated, up to date. The data that we're dealing with is being managed the right way, and the physical structure of it is the way it needs to be. We've got end user license agreements that I don't think I've ever read one. And I've probably signed hundreds. And that's because they're just so doggone long. They're written by lawyers, and it's not something I'm comfortable going through and taking the time to read it. So it's, I swear that when I scroll down in my mind, I'm just saying, yeah, whatever. Let's just get through this. And it's there for a reason. And we got to make sure that we're covered. If we don't agree to it, we can't use the software. We have to be aware when we install third-party software. I say third-party. It's not something I wrote. It's not something Microsoft wrote. Some other person, some other company wrote this software. Now, that end user license agreement, the check boxes, now I said I don't always look at, I've looked at some of them. I haven't read through them, but I've looked at them well enough to realize, oh, wait. This thing's telling me that not only am I installing what I want, but by checking this box, I'm agreeing to allow them to install other things as well. So that end user license agreement can be the tell, if you will. Them telling you, hey, you're about to make a bad decision. And I have seen that. So when it comes to data, I had a conversation with a student yesterday about some research he's wanting to do in AI. It's a grad student. And the data that she wants to use is healthcare related. As well, you're going to have a hard time being able to access healthcare data to do your research. There's a few ways to go about it. You got to sign a lot of agreements. They have to confirm you are who you are, and even after they know who you are, they give you access, they put a proxy in between you and the data. And that proxy literally filters out personal information so that anything you get relative to patients that exist in this limited data set, anything you get has no descriptors about the patient. You can't identify the patient in any way based on what you get. So there's a lot of regulation and compliance policies when it comes to data today. If we have servers at the college that have aged out, so that would be somewhere around 5-6 years old. Servers did 5-6 years, and we're going to get rid of it. I can't just take that thing and throw it in the garbage. I can't sell it as it exists because there's data on the hard drive that by regulation, I have to dispose of that hard drive and get it certified as being disposed of. So the hard drive's got to be removed from it. It's got to be sent to a company, or the company comes and gets it. They shred the hard drive. I mean, literally, physically shred the hard drive and provide us with documentation certifying that that data is no longer available in any form. So I've got to go about this in a certain way. Now, when it comes to destroying things, not just destroying things, but there's things that I may have to keep for a number of years. In the financial industry, they've got to keep things a very long time. In business, we're talking taxes and everything, we've got to keep data for a very long time. So we've got regulations when it comes to how long we keep data, where we keep data, who has access, how they have access. All these things come into play, and that's all security. That's all aspects of secure data. So all these things we've got to keep track of in education, and it's probably 15 years now since they instituted FERPA. The Federal Education Privacy Rights Act, I think is what it stands for, but essentially it's all your personal information about you going to school. The fact that you're even in my class, that's protected. We've got PHI, that's that protected health information that I was talking about, that if you went to, I think it's allofus.org is the healthcare third-party entity that allows research through their third party. That's how you get to the actual data, but you can't see any PHI. There's payment card information. They don't want that to be available. Any personal government information, your social security number. We don't use that at the college anymore, other than for financial aid purposes. That used to be how students were identified, was your social security number. And when FERPA came out, they said, no, we're going to stop that. So they gave everybody another unique identifier. So all these ways to identify you, we're having to protect all of that data, secure it. Here's where I was just talking about, if I'm going to destroy data, and it's not just destroying data, but destroying the hardware that they're stored on. Just because I delete something doesn't make it gone. So if I delete data, I've got to go through a process to delete it, to overwrite it, to zero fill it. There's so much that I've got to go through to make it gone and still use that hard drive, that storage device. We essentially end up trashing the drive and replacing the drive. And we've got to pay money to do that. They talk about here, we can go through and degauss it, which is just hitting it with a magnet, but it may not always work. Shredding it, works. So this is where we get to, how do you respond when people are doing things they're not supposed to be doing? And it's got to be part of the policy. So we've got to have a policy in place. Here's how you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. You go through a door one person at a time, let it shut behind you, the other people come in. When you walk away from your computer, you log out, and then you just come log back in when you get back. But we've also got to have protocols in place how the organization responds to things that have happened. How do we react to these situations? One of the things, like if I wanted to terminate an employee, depending on what their role was, many organizations won't tell you that you're being let go. They call you down to your immediate supervisor's office at a certain point in time, or have you meet some distance away from your office at a certain point in time. If you had a computer that you took home with you on a regular basis, they could schedule this appointment or meeting to coincide with, we need you to bring that in so that we can do an inventory audit on it. So you've brought in the laptop or whatever device, you brought that in so we could do an audit on it. And while they're doing the audit, you're in being let go. And there's also somebody else boxing your stuff up in your office and carrying it over so they can escort you off the property. That was all things to prevent you from having access to any systems so that you could do harm. So any of these systems that you could impact, they get locked down. Any of the access methods that you had, they get disabled. And it all coincides about the same time as you get walked out the door. It's all happening before you get walked out the door, but everything's getting locked down because they don't want bad things to happen. Now, there has to be protocols in place how we deal with certain things. Who's tasked with it. And we've got to have certain channels of how to do whatever it is we've got to do. If somebody's done something, we have to maintain the evidence. We have to maintain the data, the footprints or the trail that took place, if you will. And there's, in the computer or digital forensics course that we've got, we deal with these concepts, incident documentation, the incident report, the chain of custody, all these things relative to if somebody has intruded into our system, they've gotten in, they've attacked us in some way, and it's not even necessarily just attack. It could be that somebody's just accessed something they should not have accessed. It's one of the things that we do over certain instances. We'll create what's called a honeypot, and it's a file that could be named passwords, banking info, just given a name that is very attractive or intriguing to somebody that is up to no good. And as soon as that resource gets accessed, an alert is sent to administration. They know what's taken place, and now they're actively monitoring who's accessed it, how they've accessed it, where they accessed it from, everything that's going on, and everything's being documented. So there's so much that we've got to do relative to that, but it's not just have a plan, implement the plan for how we're securing everything, but we've also got to have it on the back end that if something bad happens, we've got to document everything that took place so that we're covered. A lot of this piggybacks off of, like I was saying, things that we've done before. It hits home because a lot of these security practices, they're things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We've all got to do the two-factor authentication. At what point is it going to go to 3 or 4? Are there going to be additional types of authentication that they're going to come up with? We've got the different levels of security. the physical security, the software security, and knowing how we address each one, and it's all situational depending on the organization. Make sure that the software has certificates, the licensing that goes along with the software. Most of it's all traditional, but glance at it, because sometimes it's not traditional end user license agreement. It's saying, oh, you don't mind us installing this as well, do you? Yeah, I do. Absolutely do. Any issues with